Good evening, my name is Thomas Caldwell and I'm the programmer at the Melbourne International Film Festival. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered on the traditional land of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. Welcome to Disability in Cinema Beyond Representation, a MIFF Talks event in partnership with Screening Ideas, the Other Film Festival, which is produced by Arts Access Victoria, and 5Stream. This year the MIFF Talks program is presented by the University of Melbourne Faculty of Fine Arts and Music. For information on other events, please visit miff.com.au/talks. And while I'm here, I do also want to draw your attention to the upcoming screenings of the feature film Kairos, both later tonight at 9 p.m. and then again this Wednesday. Both Chris Bunton, the star of Kairos, as well as Paul Barakat, the film's writer-director, are on tonight's panel. You'll hear more about them in a minute. I would now like to hand over to Duncan Kayard from Screening Ideas. Thanks.
He's too tall. So I'd like to add my greetings to Thomas. My name's Duncan Kayard. I'm one of the coordinators of Screening Ideas. We're a regular talks and screening program run out of the University of Melbourne. You can follow us on Facebook, but you don't have to. As I'm sure we're all aware, there's a long and ongoing history of erasing the creative contributions as well as the works of people with disabilities. As a result, disability and difference is not simply hidden from the camera, but behind the camera as well quite often, limiting the rights of people to tell their own story on their own terms. With this in mind, this panel has two key goals. First, to acknowledge and celebrate the work of people with disabilities. And two, to challenge the ableist expectations that form a barrier and to work towards a more inclusive industry here and now in Melbourne. But I also acknowledge that for many people here today, as well as many people watching or listening at home, this is not simply an idea. It is not something that we just talk about. It's life. So with that, I'd like to pretty much shut up and pass over to our extraordinary panel. Paul Barakat is an experienced actor, having trained with Stella Adler, Stanislavski and Chekhov acting processes under Lynette Sheldon. He has appeared in a range of film, TV and theatre productions, including East West 101 and Farscape, and is the director of Kairos, which is screening later tonight. Chris Bunton is really the breakout star of the festival this year, so we're incredibly proud to have him on the panel tonight. He's an actor, gymnast and dancer who just happens to have Down syndrome. He's acted in 3 feature films, Down Under, which screened at MIFF in 2016, Little Monsters, which is screening at this year's festival, and in Paul's Kairos, which is screening later tonight. Chris also works with the Special Olympics Australia as a communications assistant and YMCA Penrith as a gymnastics coach. Our moderator tonight is Fiona Tuomy. She's an inclusive storytelling specialist, an award-winning screenwriter, director, producer and developer working across storytelling genres and platforms. She's a graduate of AFTRS, where she made a series of celebrated short films with fellow students including Samantha Lang, Tony McNamara and Warwick Thornton. In May 2019, Fiona was appointed to a new advisory group which will help shape the Victorian Government's strategy and investment in creative industries from 2020. Tracey Corbin-Matchett, and I'm sorry, this sounds very formal, but I'm trying to get everything right, is an inclusion and diversity champion, making groundbreaking change in the film industry through her role as CEO of pioneering not-for-profit organisation Bus Stop Films, where she is leveraging her strong industry connections to use filmmaking and the film industry to raise the profile of people with disability on both sides of the camera. With a career spanning diverse sectors, Tracey has led many projects seeking greater inclusion and diversity in the screen industry. Alistair Baldwin is a writer, comedian based in Naarm, Melbourne. He has written for the ABC's The Weekly, Hard Quiz and Get Crackin', the latter of which he also stars as a very tired PA. And I knew you from somewhere, so I've done it. And then finally, Caroline Bowditch, returned to Australia in July 2018 after 16 years living and working in the UK to take up the role of Chief Executive Officer at Arts Access Victoria. She's best known as a performer, maker, teacher, speaker, and mosquito buzzing in the ears of the art industry in Australia, the UK, and further afield. Please welcome our panel.
So thank you, Thomas and Duncan. So first of all, I want to say Wamanjika, which is welcome. So it is exciting to be part of the growing conversations and programs for diversity and inclusion in film and television. Tonight we will be discussing change at the centre, advocating for deeper understanding of the rich talent and experience of people with disability. Tonight I would also like to acknowledge all of those who have come before us, our fierce visionary disability advocates, and most particularly Leslie Hall and Stella Young. The social model of disability is now the internationally recognised way to view and address disability. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities marks the official paradigm shift in attitudes towards people with disability and approaches to disability concerns. So not long after I first learnt about the social model of disability, I realised I could apply this disability rights model to the screen industry. Instead of for years feeling like there must be something wrong with me as a disabled filmmaker, or the reasons my projects, which have always been drawing on my lived experience in the world, were getting knocked back or sometimes not even understood. That as an individual, I was also experiencing systemic barriers reflective of the physical, attitudinal, communication and social environment of the screen industry. I'm going to go to Caroline first, who's going to just give us a brief summary of actually what is the social model of disability.
I'm sure lots of you in the audience, let's have a show of hands. How many people have heard of the social model of disability? Yeah, so quite a few, maybe 40, 50%. So the social model of disability is a philosophy or a way of thinking that recognises that people are more or less disabled by the barriers created by society than necessarily by their bodies. And the best example that I can give you of this is I've spent a very privileged time in my life travelling all over the world, and I can be more or less disabled depending on where I am. Nothing about my physicality changes, but depending on where I am, what environment I meet, the attitudes I meet, the sort of systems that are in place, I can be made to feel more or less disabled. And the UN's definition of disability is actually that disability results from interactions between a non-inclusive society and an individual. So the barriers that we create through lack of access to education, to employment, to information, to appropriate housing or accommodation, to socialisation opportunities, all those sorts of things, they're all barriers, and removal of those barriers is the way forward. If we don't remove those barriers, the consequences include poverty, marginalisation, discrimination, and shame. This is kind of the social model 101. I hope it made sense to people. I also just want to point out that myself and Fiona will probably talk about disabled people, which I know is not necessarily the done thing in the country, because the language police tell us we're not allowed to say that, but we do. And we say it as a point of pride. We say it because it acknowledges us having a disabled identity. It is part of who we are, and it's an important part of who we are.
So just linking that a little bit back, why do we believe it's important that screen practitioners and performers, so that's all of the industry, be aware of the social model of disability?
Why?
Yeah.
Did you say? Why should they
Yeah.
be aware of the social model?
In the screen. I mean, Alistair, you
Why shouldn't they be aware? Because, I mean, we construct barriers, and the barriers that people create exclude people, and it then limits the stories that we hear. It limits the kind of perspectives that we see, and it has the potential to make for a very boring presentation of what we are exposed to in the world. And also, we know that people with disabilities make up 20% of the population. Therefore, do we see their lives, their stories, hear their voices 20% of the time? Nah.
Well, you're probably going to touch on it in your... Because you can't not touch on it, really, as we go along. Will I go to Chris? What do you want to say?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think specifically talking about the social model of disability, at the end of the day, film and television, I mean, it's storytelling, and if we didn't accept that, you know, society has an impact on disability, how they're made to feel included or excluded in society, then a cultural product like stories, the way we connect with each other, wouldn't have an impact. But I know just personally, you know, seeing stories about disabled people who feel pride or who stand up to ableist structures, being able to see that means that I can be that. It gives me something to aspire to. It makes me feel less alone. And so I think, you know, talking about disability in screen storytelling just inherently aligns with the social model rather than the medical model, because if my disability was only constructed by DNA rather than society, then it doesn't matter how many fantastic films I watch, I would still feel the same as I did before I could start seeing some, you know, MA 15 plus good disability representation, which has, yeah, helped me out.
Okay.
Can I add a quote in here, Fiona?
Yes.
Which is about, there is a quote that I heard recently that talked about vampires and monsters don't have reflections. So if we don't have an opportunity to see ourselves reflected in the world, does that make us monsters? Does that start to make us question our presence in the world, whether we exist? Do we become imagined?
Do you want to say, we'll go to Chris? Or?
Oh, I just like to add, you know, as a parent of 2 children with disability, my older daughter is 17, she is deaf, and all I've had to show her for a very long time is children of a lesser God. Like, we need to move on from there, we can't hang our coat on, but we've done that, we've already explored disability in film. That, you know, if we're not reflecting who our diverse community is on screen, we're really missing out, and we're further marginalising people with disability because we're not telling their stories and including them in the process of telling those stories.
Yeah, and I should say tonight as well, when we're referring to disability, we are, and I hope that's okay, we're including the deaf community as well. So, Chris, are you ready for your first question?
Oh, yes, I am.
And this follows on, this is the social model in action. Chris, what does it mean for you as an actor, being the lead in an Australian feature film?
Oh, well, being the lead actor means a lot to me. I am honoured to portray a person living with a disability, and I am proud that Australia is leading the way in inclusive filmmaking. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Chris. So I'm just going to throw to Caroline again. We want to talk a little bit about the role of allies, or sometimes we call it accomplices.
Yeah. So the difference between an ally and an accomplice, the amazing Veronica Pardo pointed this out to me, who is a CEO at Multicultural Arts Victoria. She said, an ally will stand beside you or be beside you, but an accomplice is someone who has got skin in with you. They are willing to put their neck on the line for you. and be with you when you go into battle. Allies can very easily move back, but accomplices will stay with you. But allies are absolutely critical in us progressing, and allies, and we'll talk a bit more about this later, I'm sure, Fiona, are the ones that are willing to be with us but not to take over, to still allow the disabled voice to be the loudest in a space, and who will speak words that they've heard us say at times when they could speak their own. And allies are absolutely critical. I think it's important to know that, disability-led, which we'll come back to, is important, but we need people who are going to be in it with us and see this as being just as critical as we do. So maybe the question is your skin in it? Are you skin in?
And we have a very powerful and strong accomplice with us on stage, Paul, who I want to acknowledge.
Oh, thank you.
And Chris, do you want to ask Paul a question? What would you want him to talk about Kairos, to say? Sorry, that was a spontaneous question.
It is.
Well, you want to, it's very important that he's here on stage tonight with you, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So I got a good question for Paul. Why? What was your inspiration to create Kairos?
That's a pretty loaded question. It's a number of things. I mean, look, I love cinema. I love the art form of cinema. I, grown up on it and, absorbed it, and it's been part of my life since I was very young. I knew what I wanted to do when I was a kid. And I guess, I was always also a fan of like Greek myth and things like that. So those words always used to sort of pop up somewhere or another, depending on what I was reading at the time. And a particular experience I had, which is a very personal moment that I haven't shared with a lot of people, was an experience I had in Lebanon when I was young. My parents actually decided, in their infinite wisdom, to take us to war-torn Lebanon in 1988, and we had to get in by boat because the airport was pretty much inaccessible. Civil War's still raging. We also went to Disneyland that year, so I sort of made up for it. But anyway, I went to the village, and while this war was raging a few hours away in the city, here I am, 8 years old, getting exposed to all these sort of strange things. And all of a sudden, an older cousin of mine, approaches us. I had never met her before. And she was a fair bit older than me. And she'd had sustained brain damage when she was, I think, quite young, and wasn't able to sort of communicate clearly. And I think she was just trying to approach us to sort of, have a game. And immediately I noticed this atmosphere around us change. And I noticed how everybody sort of froze up, and even, the people around got sort of scared. Oh, you don't want to sort of, be around her. We're not, because it's sort of unpredictable. And they pulled me, I remember them pulling me away from her, just some of the villagers that were there. And I remember looking back at her, and she was just sort of calling out to me and, smiling. And so that stuck with me. I guess that was sort of the genesis of this whole project. Really, it stayed with me my entire life. And I learned through time that I had relatives that had, different disabilities. My cousin was blind, but he's a virtuoso violinist in Lebanon and travels all around the Middle East. He made a film that went to Cannes a few years ago. These stories sort of kept popping up. What I did notice, though, was this sort of attitude of fear and misunderstanding. And I'm not saying I've been a crusader for it at all. My attitude towards disability has matured over the time, I think everybody reacts out of what they, usually out of fear about what they don't know, what they don't understand, and if they don't see that on screen, then that's often an issue. And so I noticed there was a huge void in the cinema landscape where we actually saw someone with a disability that was authentically cast, and if it wasn't Daniel Day-Lewis or Dustin Hoffman, playing someone with a disability, it was, the people that actually had disabilities were often relegated to sort of minor supporting roles, and they weren't that complex, the roles. They were always kind of there as a cipher or something, or a symbol, to say, oh, you're going to teach this other character, how they can live life to the fullest, And I was like, I didn't want to see that anymore. And yeah, that's how it all started, I guess. That's a long-winded answer, I'm sorry, but...
That's a fantastic answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
You happy with that answer, Chris?
I am.
Good. I promise no more spontaneous questions. So thank you, Paul. So gone are the days where it's acceptable that people with disability will be largely unseen, misrepresented and underemployed by the mainstream. There are many ways to tell stories and make screen work, and we encourage the screen sector to continue to embrace inclusive production structures and processes. And I'm just going to read a short quote that my dear friend and longtime colleague Warwick Thornton made, and it is, "A sensitive film such as Samson and Delilah could quite easily die in the industrial model of conventional filmmaking. The crews, the trucks, the process. So we decided to take a different approach, one we know works. A small crew, no trucks, just the bare minimums. A crew chosen for their hearts, not their CVs." So I'm going to go to Alistair now, and there is two parts to this question, but firstly, can you give us a perspective on how decisions in the writers' rooms, which is, I suppose, particularly talking to television, have impacts on screen diversity? And secondly, what has to change to ensure authentic disability representation on screen?
Certainly. I think starting with, the impact of choices that people make in the writer's room, I think a lot of people, for example, tend to think of, if we're just talking about on-screen disability diversity, that's just something for casting to deal with or something, or they'll be like, we have this disabled character, but, I think there's certain tropes within screenwriting around disability, like the idea that someone's disability should be an interesting backstory for them. Maybe it symbolises an internal tragedy that they've suffered. And so from a writing perspective, there's this history of using disability as this sort of shorthand, really, a narrative to make someone seem complex or like they've suffered something narratively devastating that they have to overcome. And a decision like that seems, it's not inherently great, but it's not inherently bad. But if that's a trope that people keep going to, it's something where you start making decisions that, I guess someone's disability should be acquired in that sense, so we can get a sense that they've really lost something, which isn't bad necessarily. Of course, I think there should be a balance between representation of congenital disability and acquired disability. But then if from a screenwriting perspective you're like, we want to see the person they were so that we can see all they've lost, but they've still got a smile on their face. Or if it's a cure narrative, which is another trope in screenwriting, we want to see them overcome their disability, learn to walk again after a boating accident, or they were mountaineering or something like that. And these are all things which happen in real life, but it means that from a casting perspective you have to have an able-bodied actor, because a lot of writers, a lot of abled writers are so hyper-focused on how they relate to stories of disability. This question of, what if I lost ability? And that leads to these choices where they want to show the before and after. That's their emotional entry point. And that impacts casting, because you can't have an actually disabled person be the before and after. It impacts whether we're seeing, and representative amount of congenital disabilities on screen as opposed to acquired disabilities. I think those are two key ways where writing can really impact casting.
No, thank you, Alistair.
And what was the second bit? Sorry.
No, it's good, and we'll have more time for questions at the end. So, Tracey, can you please tell us about the role of bus stop films and creating access to a film school experience, which I think is such a fantastic term, and also, because you are based in Sydney, your partnership with AFTRS, which is the Australian Film, Television, Radio School.
I'd be delighted to. So earlier when we were talking about accomplices and allies, bus stop films began from an amazing accomplice who has significant amount of skin in the game, Genevieve Clay-Smith, an award-winning director and filmmaker who could be doing amazing stuff, but she's chose to focus her career on raising the profile of people with disabilities. So Bus Stop Films teaches adults with intellectual disability film studies through our Accessible Film Studies program, and we're really delighted to have a great relationship with AFTRS. We've been delivering the program there since 2016. We're at full capacity. We hope to expand another class there, so if you're watching AFTRS, we'd like another classroom next year. And it does give people with intellectual disability a realistic film school experience. It's a 40-week program. Chris is one of our students. We've got other students here in the audience. They learn all aspects of filmmaking. It is film school. You do get homework. You are taught by industry professionals, and throughout the course of that 40-week program, the students create a project. It's a student-led project. They will do scripting, casting, lighting design, set design, etc. And they make an amazing film, which doesn't look like a student film. It's an award-winning, beautiful film. We've got a film here at MIFF. Our films screen all over the world. They win awards. They're in Qantas in-flight entertainment. We've got films coming out shortly on SBS and other commercial channels. And part of the beauty of what Bus Stop Films does is that we also support the film industry to look at inclusive filmmaking, so that the students are taught by industry professionals, and we also hire a lot of women. We've got a really positive gender bias in our organisation. So those emerging filmmakers who come on board and teach our classes then are learning inclusive film practices. They also get a credit and get to make an amazing film. So it supports that holistic ecosystem. And we've been really great to have this great support with AFTRS. So the students there are attending classes alongside other film students who are learning about film studies. So we're all in it together. Our program is accessible. It's not especially inclusive because the students are studying it together. But it does provide a film school experience, and it's not craft, it's not hand-holding, it's actual professional opportunities.
And you have lots of industry opportunity for the students as well, which is
fantastic.
So important.
Yeah, really important. Our students do then work on commercial productions. We've had students this year working on The Other Guy Series 2, doing post-production in MasterChef. We've got opportunities coming up that are paid and unpaid attachments in the industry. So it's around opening pathways to employment and capturing 10 years of learning of making amazing films and making them inclusively. And in addition to AFTRS, we're also in Western Sydney. We're about to expand to Canberra, we're in Wollongong, and we're also in Mongolia, which is a fantastic barbecue stopper. So, all of this has happened because somebody wanted to be an accomplice and have skin in the game, which is really fantastic.
Thank you, Tracey. So, Chris, we know you're with Bus Stop Films, and yes, and previously you were with Ruckus Ensemble, and I know we have some of your colleagues in the audience too that were in the film, and also you studied acting classes at NIDA. So do you want to tell us a little bit about how working with these companies or organisations has helped you as a professional actor?
Oh, well, it started when I was a kid. So I loved to watch Back to the Future. And I was watching this film over and over and over and over and over again. And I loved the film, but I also loved behind the scenes footage. I loved it so much. So this has led me to join NIDA drama classes for people with disabilities to learn basic stagecraft. And one of my achievements in those classes was overcoming my stage fright. So then I progressed to a theatre ensemble called Ruckus. Some of the members are here in the audience. So Digby Webster is one of them.
Who's also in Kairos with you.
Yeah.
Yes. We were a group of 6 people with Down syndrome. We learned lots of theatre skills, and some of the skills are in the film industry too, so we go hand in hand in this. We learned about writing, acting. We also had a leading choreographer in our workshops, so we learned about dance too, another art form. And we also learned from other departments such as, well, lighting, costume, and sound. Yes, and we worked with a sister organisation in Cambodia, and we collaborated with them, and we created a theatre production, which we performed publicly in Sydney. Then I joined Buster Films. I'm a current member with Buster Films, and Buster Films is a company where people with disabilities, just like me and other disabilities, get a chance to learn about filmmaking. Not just about making films, we also learn theory-based work. We learned about mise-en-scene, film noir, and also history of the film. So it's not just about film theory, we also learn about how a film is made with hands-on experience. So this year, my class, so there's 3 classes at Buster Films at the Aptus Film School. So I'm part of the second group. We were learning about animation. So we learned about the history of animation, and also we created a short stop motion animation, which we shown publicly to the Sydney Film Festival. It was great. Everyone loved it, and Digby Webster had his own little piece there too, so it was great to have 2 things for Vivid. So how this company helped me to become a professional actor was learning these skills has helped me to develop my craft as an actor. This has led me to my first feature film, which was called Down Under, directed by Abe Forsyth. He had that film shown here at MIFF in 2016. Then it also led me to act in 5 feature films and a few TV productions. I was in Other Guy, if everyone saw that. I also was in Doctor with Roger Corsa. So, and also including the film that's going to be shown tonight, Kairos. And it was a great opportunity to play the leading role as Danny.
Thank you, Chris. There's a pretty good ambassador for you, Tracey.
Oh, he's an excellent ambassador.
I know you've got a number.
I know. Fantastic ambassador.
Well, thank you. So Caroline, often with disability leadership, we use the term disability-led. Can you please talk about what this means, and especially in the context of disability-led storytelling?
Yeah. So Alistair gave me a lovely in with this, where you talked about the tropes, the myths that sit around disability. And I think that's probably the biggest shift in disability-led storytelling, is that we don't necessarily fall into those traps. We're more interested in telling it like it is, giving a bit more of a reality check, as it were, and telling the stories that we want to tell. We've been doing some research with the University of Melbourne at Arts Access Victoria, which has been called The Last Avant-Garde, and it's been looking at inclusive practice. And one of the concepts that's started to be developed in that project is this idea that non-disabled researchers or non-disabled makers that sit in that space that is disability-led are actually invited guests. So you're invited into the space completely and you're valued in that space, but you are always invited, and at some point you may be asked to leave. At some point you may be asked to step aside so that the disabled voice comes forward, that the disabled person takes the lead. And that's a very, very different way of us thinking, and it's a very potentially uncomfortable place for a lot of people to find themselves, or to even think about themselves in this kind of thought of being an invited guest, because historically that's not where disabled people have been. They haven't necessarily been leaders, and yeah, the societal kind of image of disability is not as leaders. So there's quite a lot to get our heads around. And a lot of the time, disabled people are left to do a lot of the heavy lifting if they're involved in something. So it's kind of up to us to educate the non-disabled people that are in a space, rather than kind of going, you guys, you need to do the work if you want to come and work in this space. We'll go so far with you, but if you want to do more, you need to do more as well. So this idea about sharing the heavy lifting, rather than all sitting on my shoulders to teach you what it is that you need to know to be in this space, at a kind of political level that works.
Thank you, Caroline. Before we're each going to give, everyone on the panel will give some advice and recommendations. There's one more question for Chris. So what is your dream as an actor or filmmaker in Australia?
Well, I would like to be a filmmaker too. So my dream as an actor is to see that the film industry is fully inclusive in front and behind the camera. For me, I would like to be very optimistic in getting more roles in the future, so that people with disabilities and Down syndrome get the chance to portray an authentic representations of themselves. And this is what I think from people, because I'm an advocate for disabilities too, so I would say, oh, sorry about that. Well, however, it is not, however, it depends on if the roles are written and available for people with disabilities. And also, we would like to be more optimistic to see more inclusive storytelling in the future.
Thanks, Chris. I should have asked everyone on the panel that question, so you can, if you've got a dream in your recommendation, you're welcome to do that as well. But I Chris asked me to prepare some questions, and that was one particularly you wanted to talk to, wasn't it? Yep. So just in our last 10 minutes or so, we'll just, with the panel, like, what advice do you have for people? So that's not a bit. Yeah. Well, yeah, what is your advice, or what is your one main tip or recommendation? Maybe Alistair could flow on from Chris, because you're a screenwriter and actor as well. Did you know Did you see him in Get Cracking?
No, really. I only was born in 1992, so I didn't see that film.
Chris, it was on this year. I should have prepared earlier.
I'm so old. No, but thank you. No, I'd love to. I think the idea of creating opportunities. I mean, if I had advice that links in with a dream and like a seamless sort of fusion of those two things that you want me to speak to, I think my advice is don't wait, because I think, it's something that ableist societies teach us, indoctrinate us with, is that any opportunities or benefits we get is because of their kindness. They're benefactors for us, they're giving us opportunities, they're creating initiatives for us and stuff like that. And ultimately, if you wait around until the industry is fixed, it won't be fixed, because I think it needs to be disability-led. There needs to be disabled people in writers' rooms to tell them not to say those particular words or not phrase things in cliche ways, because there might be a budding writer at home watching that TV show and say, that show's not for me, that show could never include me in a production sense, because these are the kind of ideas they're having. I think it's recognising the problematic things that you see on screen as an opportunity to, mess them up, turn them around, make them different and better, rather than seeing that as, I guess, a place that's, trying to dissuade you from entering. Because if there was I can't name a place in the entire Australian industry that's 100% welcoming for disabled people by virtue of it existing in the world in 2019. But I think just by being there and making your voice heard, you can improve things like increments at a time. I think so.
Thank you, Alistair. Tracey?
My advice would be, and it's something that we've already discussed, is around allies and accomplices. I really like that as a new term. And I tell my daughters, I'm your accomplice. Is look for those people, because I'm a person that lives with disability. I have 2 children. I work in a disability-led organisation, and we are disability-led from our advisory board down through board, myself and other members of staff, down to our student ambassadors. Thanks, Chris. It's exhausting constantly advocating and trying to knock on doors and ask to be heard. So look for the allies and accomplices that can walk with you. And I always say that in terms of advocacy, and I look at advocacy in gender, that it's a strong woman that rises to the top, but it's a kind woman that leads the ladder down. So look for the ones that are leading the ladder down or opening the doors. And work together and do those collaborations. I have a really good friend who's a filmmaker who uses a wheelchair, and I remember her saying to me, before she came and worked with me, that she had pretty much given up getting a job because sets weren't accessible. No one was looking. They would look at her CV, and then in interviews she wasn't getting it because someone wasn't saying why not. It's the why nots, like let's work together and we'll work it out together. I don't know what we'll do, but we'll do it together and to get there. So those allies and accomplices, look out for them, connect to them, reach out to them. Reach out to organisations like Bus Stop Films. I'm quite happy to take emails and questions and point people out. It's a big network, and it's all around, who you know and networking and those relationship buildings. So, look out for that, allies and accomplices.
Yeah, and another way, just following on from that, I like to sort of sometimes the yes people, and we know who the yes people are, and, particularly I think we can do, there's many names we can mention, but particularly Courtney Gibson is a great example of a yes person. Yeah,
worked with her, and game-changing people, the ones that say, why not? They're a bit, sometimes it's hard to keep up with them catching all the ideas, but those ideas are really powerful, and look out for those allies and those accomplices who will say, yes, let's do it, think outside the box. And, sometimes we have to advocate for ourselves, and it's tiring and exhausting. So hand that over to the able-bodied people to do that for a little bit.
Yeah, no, thank you. Caroline, you're the buzzing mosquito, sometimes you describe yourself.
I would say to any disabled people in the audience or watching, continue to be unexpected bodies in unexpected places. what I've discovered being in this job is that CEOs don't look like me, apparently. Well, based on the reaction that I get when I turn up at places and say I'm a CEO, they kind of go, really? Ah, okay, unexpected, wasn't expecting you. No, there you go, here I am, hi! And we're going to have fun. And it's both of your points. It's that thing about shift your heads, change your minds, open them up, find the amazing people, ask the questions, find out what people need to do their best work in those spaces rather than becoming terrified by what you're imagining they might need, because chances are they will need very little once things are set up the way they need them to be. Be open, be curious, be unexpected.
Thank you, Caroline. And Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I can only talk from my own sort of experience, but I would say that, we really struggled to get this film made from the beginning, funding-wise, but I found a group of like-minded people that believed in the project, and that was good to know that they were out there. That's not going to happen every time, though. And so I hear a lot from different organisations that say that we're making change, initiatives are there, there's pathways, but I don't see much action being taken. So there's a lot of talk, but little action. I'm not saying we've made a perfect film or a perfect narrative, but I guess I'm hoping that the film can get some sort of conversation started so that hopefully we can open up the platform to hear more authentic voices as well come through. One of the beautiful experiences of working on Kairos was meeting these incredibly talented and creative individuals like, the members of Ruckus that I worked with, each with their own, incredible ideas, and I thought, why aren't we seeing any of these stories on screen? I mean, it'd be amazing if, we could find more pathways to make this happen. And, there's a lot of logistics that go into filmmaking and money, but at the end of the day, I hear the conversation out there, but I don't see much action, and that's what needs to happen, It's a systemic change. It really needs to occur. I remember having this conversation about, inclusivity and in terms of authentically representing people from different communities. I mean, from my own background, having a Lebanese background, 20 years ago, and we're still talking about it. I just think that sometimes you've got to put your money where your mouth is and go for it. And I think filmmakers out there, producers, I was often told you need an experienced EP with 3 feature films under their belt to be able to get funded or something like that, I mean, if we wait for that, if we wait to find those right people, these stories are never going to get told. So, yeah, I think we really need to start seeing some change at that level, and filmmakers should be opened to hearing these voices. Producers should be on the lookout for people of varying abilities to be able to tell various stories. That's yeah.
Thank you so much, Paul. So we've got about 10 minutes left, and we're going to open it up to audience questions.
When you arrive on the microphone, just raise your hand, and the volunteer will come racing to you.
Hi there, my name is Selwyn. I am a deaf person, and I'm very happy. I want to talk about something. In regards to storytelling, listening to various stories out there and then producing films is fantastic. However, I want to talk about visibility and making sure the visibility of disability-led art. I feel that it's quite limited. And I suppose the reason is that people do like to hear about deaf people telling a story about deafness. They want to talk about cochlear implants. They want to talk about sign language, and that seems to be it. I mean, it's great that those films are made. However, it's something that I'm not interested in. We want to make a film about, say, horror, for example, or a deaf person as a policeman, or a war story. Something dramatic. Something by deaf people in our native language, Auslan. So, Auslan is another language. It's completely different to English, and I know English is a powerful language. It's a strong language, and it's really hard to break through that. Deaf people do have a lot of ideas. Yes, we have ideas about Auslan in horror or police stories and that sort of thing. So I would like to hear your opinion on that statement.
I guess.
Well, you were talking to me about something earlier, how many times do your children want to watch Children of Lesser God?
They do, and how angry they get when they see hearing people playing deaf people or people using sign language on film. I think it's really important. I've acquired my hearing loss as an older adult. My daughter is culturally deaf, and I've been part of the deaf community for a long time, and I would love to see more the beauty of Auslan and just other deaf characters just doing things that they do, because we all do stuff. We just do it with hearing aids. It's part of that. I actually today was emailing with Sophia Golan, who is a friend of mine who's a deaf filmmaker and has made amazing films from the perspective of her own cultural identity as well, and other friends who are actors who their sign language is their first language. So it's around, I guess, encouraging those conversations, like Paul mentioned, that we have been having for a number of years around looking at different cultural identity on screen and creating more content that is showing deaf people as a cultural community rather than deaf disability, for sure.
Caroline, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, Selwyn, you're so right about our life is more than just about disability. So it's about, I make lots of work about love. But I make work about love because I don't want to make a work about disability. But I make work about the way my falling in love might have been impacted by my perception in the world. So, but we have so many other stories to tell that aren't about our disability, but are informed by our lived experience of speaking other languages, being in the world. And I think that's such an important thing to reinforce, is that we're not one-dimensional, and actually those aren't the stories that interest us as audience. I always groan when I get into a cinema and all of a sudden the film starts and there we go, there's disability, and it's like, oh God, I do this day in, day out. Really? Do I have to watch it now? Told by someone that doesn't even know it, because that's not what it looks like. So yeah, I think it's really the point you made about we want to make work that's more than, but informed by.
And also, Selwyn, very much acknowledging that Auslan, as you said, is a language in its own right. It's many people's first language, and it is a culture. Yep. And so, and I know you're a writer, and I know you've probably, have you got a script hiding away? If not, we'll encourage you.
Sorry. In regards to writing a script, no, I don't have one, unfortunately. What I would use instead would be a camera and filming myself with it being a visual language. So I've got something roughly put together that I'd love to edit, and then it would be a matter of then translating that into English, and as you can imagine, it's no simple process. Sometimes I use other visual aids such as storyboarding and drawing to make visual storyboards.
Absolutely, Selwood. Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Oh.
Thank you. That was really inspiring. My name is Megan. I make films and I have a mental illness. I wanted to ask if you have seen in the industry much space for like more sustainable filmmaking on set that wasn't so extreme on your physical and mental health, and if you felt that that was a conscious thing that you were seeing happening or you were trying to implement yourself, because I sometimes feel like approaching the industry is, it feels like it's a bit of a marathon, the kind of attitude towards getting things made, and it can feel like there's, the pace is really fast and not inclusive in the sense that it can really burn out people and exclude people in that way.
I might take that one. I should say that I also identify with the lived experience of mental health issues, and when we were referring to things like the industrial model of filmmaking, which is very much that traditional Hollywood. I mean, you know, a lot of our television and big production films work to that model. And why I referred to Warwick's Samson and Delilah quote was to show that probably one of Australia's recently most successful, like internationally applauded films was made in a very inclusive, in a very different way. And, you know, I have projects in development that, like I'm aware of certain things that will be from a screenwriting point of view. If something's a high-end drama, that's probably going to go into an industrial model way of working. But myself as a director, and I believe cinema and storytelling, it's bespoke anyway, because each project lends itself very differently, and your creative or the way you experience the world can also inform your creativity, and therefore I think that can dictate, you know, even how you might shoot, maybe in shorter sections. Another quote I had was referred to was a film made by Sophie Hyde in Adelaide called 52 Tuesdays, where they literally shot one Tuesday every week for a year. And part of that reason was because as a mother, Sophie wanted to be able to spend time with her child, but also like it opened up a lot of narrative and creative opportunities. So definitely we acknowledge it is hard, and even, you know, with the screen agencies, we're often talking with Film Victoria, well, that's great that this production company on this TV show wants to offer that opportunity, but if that's full time and if that's that many hours, that's just knocking out a whole lot of people. So I'd encourage you, if you are Melbourne based, to get in touch with us at Arts Access Victoria and the other film festival. And but yeah, I think Alistair, you were going to say something.
Oh, yeah. I think I don't have a mental illness, but I do have muscular dystrophy, and I think that definitely is one of the biggest barriers, just that it's exhausting, and there are these 10-hour days, day after day after day, and this idea that the production is going to lose all this money if you don't work yourself into the ground, and that's all well and good for people that can bounce back, people, you know, who are abled, people without mental illness, but for us, the repercussions are so much more, and so making that choice isn't as easy as it is for a lot of creative people. But I think this is an opportunity. I mean, in my dream scenario, these are the situations where screen funding bodies would step up, because at the end of the day, you know, sometimes it will be more expensive to be inclusive, but Australia is a screen funding as an industry is based on funding, it's based on subsidies, and I think, you know, we're in a position as a country where if we want to be more inclusive, if we want to make this society better, I think some of that money should be going to, you know, specifically helping meet accessibility needs, specifically covering money lost, which is such a sort of deeply capitalist way to look at it, so that people aren't looking at their budget and they're like, oh, it'd be so much cheaper if we just got an abled person, because those are the kind of decisions which lead to systemic things. But I certainly, I mean, I can speak to my experience working on Get Kraken. I think the experience of inclusivity was built into that show well into pre-production, where, you know, every single runner, every person on set had been, you know, properly inducted into things like, you know, not everyone's disability is visible, you know, not everyone is going to visually tell you that they're having a tough time. Sometimes you have to ask, sometimes you just have to offer a chair instead of just asking whether you need to go get one. And I think there's lots of great examples of, you know, technology helping people out. I think of the documentary Unrest by Jennifer Bray, who had ME, and she directed a lot of that via webcam from her bed because it wasn't accessible for her to literally be on set. I think between technology and really being on the front foot with letting everyone on production know the sort of basics or what's basic to us, it can really change things on set.
And we know access actually benefits everyone, and across our industry there are a lot of health and wellbeing issues. And just to give you a little bit more faith as well, Tracey and I are also involved in WIFT Australia, which has a whole initiative around looking at these issues.
It does. So part of a strategy that we've both been working on, Raising Films Australia, is looking at the role of parents and carers in terms of self-care, and how the industry supports us as practitioners to look out for ourselves and how we can care for ourselves, and how the industry supports us, that 10 or 12-hour days are not sustainable, and do you get the best out of your crew at the end of that 11 hours on set, and how that we can work together to make that systemic change. So part of the survey that we did with Raising Films was looking at the impacts on that and how the industry can change that. Another thing that Courtney Gibson did drive in South Australia was doing it differently, looking at filmmaking models that showcase making films in different ways, similar to 52 Tuesdays, that are more reflective of people's work-life balance and work-life integration, and not just burning us out through these long hours.
Yeah, we sort of, with Kairos, more out of necessity and the circumstances beyond our control, had to shoot over, you know, it can be done. I mean, we ended up shooting over 3 months, 30 days, you know, 10-day blocks. Not everybody was required to be on set 8 hours or 10 hours. You know, we had 4-hour, 5-hour shifts some days. It can be done, and we were on a low-budget production with, you know, barely any budget. So I don't think there's really any excuse. I think it is malleable. It is, you know, there is our workaround solutions for these sort of things, and yeah.
I mean, a lot of our industry and the renaissance of Australian cinema was founded on inclusive practices. So if you go back and look at the Sydney Filmmaker Co-op and the Melbourne Filmmaker Co-op in the 70s, the late 60s and 70s, there was a lot of different ways that films were being made, and look, it is a, you know, a competitive. It is a tough industry, and it can be a very competitive industry. And I know for a long time I felt like it was this attitude, it's almost like the survival of the fittest. But when I openly say, you know, I'm a disabled filmmaker, I feel that's a political statement, because I feel if I can, and it's not just about me, but if I can make change. So, you know, we're seeing change in the last 2 to 3 years that still shocks me a little bit, because there's so many of us for so long that have been fighting in many different ways to things to open up. So there might maybe still be a way to go, but I think this moment is really incredible, and we've just got to keep pushing and pushing. I'm mindful we're just running towards the end, and I feel like we could keep going and going, but we do have to stop because you have a premiere to go to. But I want to thank everyone on our panel, Caroline, Alistair, Tracey, Chris and Paul, and I want to thank all of you here in the audience, everyone watching on our live stream, and thank you again to MIFF, VCA Screen Ideas, and also to Firestream who helped us tonight with the live stream. So thank you so much for coming, everybody.